My mom installed a hidden camera in our family's cabin in Pine Grove to protect us from break-ins, and I completely forgot to tell my mother-in-law about it. That weekend, she went up there to feed the chickens, and on Monday, I reviewed the recording. What I saw left me shaking, but I pulled myself together and called my husband, saying only one thing: "Your mother is a monster." Before we begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and enjoy the story. Cassidy Jordan was dusting her favorite porcelain vase when the phone rang. It was a Thursday afternoon, one that was perfectly suited for quiet housekeeping, not high-stakes conversations. But her mother's voice on the other end sounded unusually excited and, at the same time, conspiratorial. The information dropped on Cassidy unexpectedly. It turned out that a week prior, while Cassidy was busy with school matters, her mother, Amara, had secretly driven out to the cabin and installed a surveillance system. Robberies had become frequent in the community. They'd heard of people losing rain barrels and garden tools mysteriously disappearing. Amara, who was 75 years old, decided she wasn't waiting for the thieves to hit their property. "Imagine this, Cassidy," she exclaimed. "I bought a button-sized camera online. A young man helped me install it in the shed. It's totally discreet. It reacts to movement. Everything is recorded on a memory card, and you can watch it later on your phone using a special app." Cassidy listened, astonished by her mother's ingenuity. In their family, her husband Bryce usually handled all technological advances. And here was an older woman who had figured out modern devices all by herself. However, there was nothing truly strange about it. Break-ins really had ramped up, and caution never hurt anyone. "I wrote the app password down on a piece of paper," Amara continued. "I'll give it to you tomorrow. Just in case anything happens, you can check on the property." After the call, Cassidy returned to her chores. The idea of the camera flashed briefly through her mind, then dissolved among other worries. She needed to grade her students' papers, prepare dinner for Bryce, and wash the accumulated laundry. The usual evening routine completely absorbed her. Friday morning, she woke to the insistent ring of the phone. Bryce had already left for his shift at the local distribution center, and the apartment was steeped in its typical morning tranquility. Her mother-in-law, Beverly Jenkins's number, flashed on the screen. The 70-year-old woman's voice was surprisingly cheerful for such an early hour. Beverly usually wasn't one to rise early and typically called after 10 a.m., but here it was 7:30 a.m., and she was on the line. "Cassidy, dear, I wanted to ask you something. Can I go up to the cabin this weekend? I want to check on things, feed the chickens, maybe weed the garden plots a little." Cassidy was stunned. In the 30 years she'd known Beverly, she had never shown the slightest interest in country chores. On the contrary, whenever the cabin was mentioned, Beverly would frown and complain about the mosquitoes, the dirt, and the discomforts of rural life. And suddenly this enthusiasm? "Of course you can go. You have the keys. But why do you want to now, Beverly? It's a lot of work right now. It will be tiring." "What do you mean, honey? I'm quite strong. I just miss nature, the fresh air. The city is too hot. There's open space, beauty up there. And the chickens, I'm sure they miss their owner." In her mother-in-law's voice, Cassidy detected nuances she had never heard before. A strange insistence, almost an obsession. Beverly never talked about the beauty of nature or fresh air. She was usually interested in soap operas, neighborhood gossip, and church services. "Are you sure another time wouldn't be better? It's chilly and the trip is long. It will be hard for you to get there." "What are you talking about, dear? I've thought of everything. The commuter bus to Pine Grove runs regularly, and if needed, I'll call a cab. I have money, don't you worry." Cassidy nearly dropped the phone. Beverly in a taxi? This was a woman who counted every dime and would walk an extra mile to save money, suddenly willing to spend on an expensive trip. Something wasn't right. "Seriously, Beverly, a taxi to the cabin? That would cost a fortune. If you really want to go, Bryce can drive you Saturday morning." "No need to bother my son. He's already tired from work. I'll manage myself. Don't worry." Her mother-in-law's insistence was becoming truly bizarre. Beverly usually accepted any help happily, especially transportation. But here she was, categorically refusing her son's offer to drive her. "Well, okay, whatever you want. Just be careful. Don't overdo it. And if you need anything, call me right away." After the conversation, Cassidy stood by the window for a long time, pondering her mother-in-law's strange behavior. What could have caused an elderly woman to change her attitude toward the cabin so radically? Before, Beverly only went out of strict necessity, and even then, reluctantly. However, she had to stop thinking about it. It was time to get ready for work. Math tests needed grading at school, and after classes, a staff meeting awaited. It promised to be an intense day. Cassidy quickly got dressed, grabbed her bag of papers, and rushed out the door. In her haste, she completely forgot the conversation with her mother about the camera. The thought of warning her mother-in-law about the surveillance system crossed her mind for a second, just as she was getting on the bus. But right then, her phone rang. It was the school principal asking about the schedule. The conversation dragged on, and the camera information was erased from her memory, displaced by work worries. The workday flew by, as usual, in a whirlwind of classes, grading, and endless meetings. Cassidy returned home late that night, tired and exhausted. Bryce was already asleep. His shift started early, so he always went to bed no later than 10 p.m. She quietly headed to the kitchen, made a cup of herbal tea, and sat by the window. Thoughts of the strange morning conversation with Beverly still haunted her. Something in her tone, that unexpected determination to go to the cabin, was unsettling. But Cassidy couldn't precisely formulate her fears. Saturday began early. Bryce was preparing to go fishing with his friends, and Cassidy planned to spend the day doing a deep clean of the apartment. At 6:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was Beverly, dressed in field clothes, dark pants, an old jacket, and rubber boots. She carried several bulky bags. "Good morning, Cassidy. I'm off to the cabin. Bryce is still asleep?" "No, he's up. He's in the bathroom. You certainly woke up early today, Beverly." Cassidy couldn't help but notice the sheer amount of luggage her mother-in-law had. 3 large bags for a one-day trip to the cabin was clearly excessive. Usually, a small backpack with sandwiches and a thermos was enough for those trips. "What are all those bags for?" "Oh, just little things. Feed for the chickens, some garden tools. Maybe I'll manage to fix a few things out there." The answer sounded evasive. Beverly clearly didn't want to go into detail. She placed the bags by the door and went to greet her son as he emerged from the bathroom. "Mom, where are you going so early?" "To the cabin, son. I've wanted to see how things are for a long time." Bryce was as surprised as his wife. His mother and the cabin were almost incompatible, but he didn't object. He only offered to drive her to the bus stop. "No need. I'll get there myself. A walk is good for my age." After her mother-in-law left, Bryce shook his head. "She's acting weird. She used to never leave the house, and now she's rushing to the cabin." Cassidy nodded, sharing her husband's bewilderment, but she couldn't explain her deeper unease. It was all based purely on intuition and observation. The day passed peacefully. Cassidy focused on her chores, cleaned the apartment, and went grocery shopping. Bryce returned from fishing happy and with a good catch. In the evening, they cleaned the fish together and discussed plans for the next day. They didn't think about Beverly again until late that night, when she called around 9 p.m. Beverly's voice sounded excited, almost euphoric. "Cassidy, dear, I had such a wonderful time. Such clean air, such beauty all around. The chickens are all healthy. I gave them food and water. I checked the garden. The tomatoes are growing, the cucumbers too. Your flowers are a sight to behold." Her mother-in-law's enthusiasm was astonishing. Cassidy had never heard such glowing commentary about life in the country from her. Normally, after any trip to the cabin, Beverly complained about tiredness, mosquitoes, and the lack of city comforts. "How wonderful that you liked it. Are you staying the night there?" "Yes, of course. I'll work a little more in the morning and then I'll come back. The bus leaves at 3 p.m. tomorrow. I'll make it in time." There was something unnatural about the conversation. Beverly was speaking too loudly, too cheerfully. And another oddity, the phone line was suspiciously quiet, Usually, at the cabin at night, you could hear sounds, chickens clucking, the rustling of leaves, neighbors' voices. But here there was total silence, as if Beverly was calling from inside a closed room. And the chickens are already asleep? What? Oh, yes, of course. They go to bed early when it gets dark. They're smart birds. The answer came after a pause, as if Beverly had been momentarily thrown off. A hint of tension, which hadn't been there at the beginning of the call, entered her voice. After her mother-in-law said goodbye and hung up, Cassidy couldn't sleep for a long time. Something in that call had put her on edge. The unnatural cheerfulness, the strange background silence, the pause when asked about the chickens. All those little details formed a disturbing picture. She tried to rationalize her feelings. Maybe she was just overly anxious. Perhaps her mother-in-law really did like the cabin and was genuinely happy with the change of scenery. But her gut instinct told her something was wrong. Definitely something was wrong. Cassidy turned on her side, looking at her peacefully sleeping husband. Bryce always said she had too much imagination. Maybe he was right, and she was worrying over nothing. But the unease didn't leave her until the next morning. Sunday began with rain. A thin, persistent drizzle beat against the window panes, bringing melancholy. Cassidy woke with a heavy premonition she couldn't explain. She spent the entire day in internal tension, waiting for something unpleasant to happen. Bryce noticed her mood. "Why are you so gloomy? Are you sick?" "No, everything's fine. It's just the depressing weather." She decided not to tell her husband about her suspicion regarding his mother's behavior. It would all sound like paranoia. A woman went to her property. What was so strange about that? By the evening, when the clock struck 8:30 p.m., and Beverly still hadn't appeared, Cassidy began to truly worry. The last bus back to the city left at 5 p.m. If her mother-in-law had missed it, how would she get home? She dialed Beverly's number, but the phone was off. She tried calling several more times with the same result. Had the battery died, or was there no signal in that area? Or perhaps something more serious had happened. "Bryce, your mother still hasn't returned from the cabin. Her phone isn't answering. Maybe we should go check." Her husband looked at the clock and frowned. "Yeah, it's getting late. But maybe she stayed at a neighbor's house and lost track of time. We'll go check first thing tomorrow if she doesn't show up." But Cassidy's concern turned out to be unfounded. At 10:30 p.m., the phone rang. Beverly was home, safe and in good spirits. "Oh, my dears, I apologize for not calling earlier. I was so tired I barely made it home. I lay down right away to rest and didn't even hear the phone. I forgot my charger at home. That's why it died." The explanation sounded plausible, but Cassidy still felt uncomfortable. In her mother-in-law's voice, those same unnatural notes from the day before reappeared. Too animated, too cheerful for someone who had just complained of exhaustion. "So how was it? Did you like the cabin?" "Oh, I don't even know how to describe it. Such beauty, such tranquility. Your chickens are a charm. They are laying well. The garden is in order. I weeded a bit. And the flowers, especially the asters by the fence, a spectacle." Beverly talked non-stop, describing the wonders of country life. Cassidy listened, feeling her unease grow. There was something false, forced in that enthusiasm, as if her mother-in-law was playing the role of a garden enthusiast while hiding something completely different. "The asters don't grow by the fence, though. They're near the deck," Cassidy commented cautiously. There was a second of silence on the phone. Then Beverly laughed. "Ah, of course. Near the deck. I got confused. Age, the memory isn't what it used to be." The explanation sounded strained. Beverly had always had an excellent memory for details. She never confused the location of plants on properties she'd known for years. After the call, Cassidy stood by the phone for a long time, trying to figure out what was bothering her. Everything seemed fine. Her mother-in-law had gone to the cabin. She had had a good time. She had returned home safe and happy. A normal story, but her intuition screamed the opposite. As she lay down, she still couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. Too many strange things. The sudden desire to go to the cabin, The insistence, the large bags, the unnatural joy in her voice, the confusion about the flower locations. Each detail separately could be explained, but together they formed a disturbing picture. Cassidy fell asleep with the firm determination to drive to the cabin the next day and check that everything was in order. Her gut feeling had never failed her, and this time was no different. Monday began with the usual routine. Bryce rushed to his shift, grabbing sandwiches on the fly and complaining about the Monday blues. Cassidy saw him off, cleared the breakfast remnants from the table, and thought about the day ahead. School breaks were ending. She needed to prepare lesson plans for the new term. While wiping the table with a cloth, Cassidy accidentally brushed against a pile of papers near the edge. Several sheets fell to the floor. As she bent to pick them up, she saw, among other notes, a small piece of paper in her mother's handwriting. The shaky letters formed an app name and a password. The same information about the camera Amara had given her on Thursday. The conversation with her mother suddenly flooded back into her memory. The camera at the cabin, the surveillance system, the app on the phone. Curiosity overcame her. It would be interesting to see how her mother-in-law spent her time on the property. Had she really weeded the plots and fed the chickens as she said? Cassidy turned on her phone and searched for the app in the store. The download took a few minutes. Registration took the same amount of time. Her fingers tentatively entered the password from the paper. Her mother had always been careful with technological matters, so she must have written everything down correctly. The screen loaded. A menu with dates appeared, Saturday and Sunday, the exact days Beverly had been at the cabin. Cassidy selected Saturday morning and pressed play. The image was black and white, not perfectly clear, but what was happening could be distinguished without difficulty. The camera was installed in a corner of the shed and covered most of the yard, the chicken coop, and part of the garden. The time on the recording showed 9:30 a.m. A familiar figure in a dark jacket appeared on the screen. Beverly opened the garden gate and entered the yard, but instead of heading immediately to the chicken coop or the house, she stopped in the middle of the yard and began looking around slowly and methodically, as if searching for someone or something. Her behavior seemed strange. She was clearly afraid of someone or looking for someone. She approached the fence, looked behind the shed, and even raised her head as if checking the windows of the neighboring houses. Then she returned to the center of the yard and continued inspecting. Cassidy sped up the playback. Beverly continued her movements for about 10 more minutes until she was sure no one was watching her. Only then did she head toward the house and disappear from the camera's view. For the next 30 minutes, the recording showed only an empty space. Chickens occasionally appeared, pecking near the coop. Their usual clucking and the crunch of their movements could be heard. Everything seemed completely normal. Then her mother-in-law came out of the house. She carried the large bags with which she had arrived in the morning, but now her behavior had changed radically. There was no caution or looking around. She moved quickly, decisively, like someone executing a pre-planned operation. She headed straight for the chicken coop. Cassidy turned up the volume, hoping to hear something, but the sound was too low. Her mother-in-law opened the door and began doing something inside. After a few minutes, she came out with a full bag. The bag moved and emitted muffled sounds. Cassidy's heart sank. She knew what she was seeing, but her mind refused to accept it. Beverly was catching the chickens one by one, methodically, unhurriedly. She placed each bird in a separate bag, zipped it shut, and carried it to the fence. Half an hour later, the entire coop was empty, 32 chickens and 1 rooster. The entire flock Cassidy had raised for several years. But that was just the beginning. After finishing with the chickens, her mother-in-law moved to the garden plot. She stomped on the tomato plants, pulled out carrots and tossed them aside, and snapped the pepper bushes. She did all this with a kind of manic obstinacy, as if she wasn't taking revenge on the vegetables, but on Cassidy herself. What she saw shook her. Her hands trembled so much she could barely hold the phone. This was not just theft or vandalism. It was a war, declared without warning, cruel and ruthless. Beverly moved on to the flower beds. The asters grown from seeds, the chrysanthemums transplanted in the spring, the freshly blooming dahlias. Everything was ruthlessly trampled. She worked like a machine of destruction, leaving no plant intact. Then came the turn of the patio furniture. The small tea table Bryce had made with his own hands was flipped over and thrown behind the shed. The benches were scattered across the yard. The decorative windmill bought last year lay broken in half among the raspberry bushes. Cassidy fast-forwarded and rewound the recording, switching between different time intervals. The image of destruction became increasingly complete. Her mother-in-law worked until nightfall, taking breaks only to drink water from the well. No sign of fatigue or hesitation, just cold, methodical cruelty. In one of the video fragments, Cassidy noticed Beverly saying something. The woman was standing in the middle of the destroyed garden and moving her lips, clearly pronouncing some words. Cassidy turned the volume up to maximum and tried to read her lips. She struggled, but scattered phrases could be made out. "Now that wretch is going to understand," the mother-in-law said, stomping on the tomato remnants. "Bryce will finally see what kind of a homemaker she is." The motive became clear. It wasn't an attack of senile dementia or a sudden fit of rage. It was a planned operation to discredit her daughter-in-law. Beverly wanted Cassidy to look like an incapable homemaker who couldn't even care for her own property. But Cassidy pulled herself together. The shock gave way to an icy rage. A fire ignited in her chest, threatening to consume everything in its path. Her hands clenched into fists. Her cheekbones ached from tension. No one had ever humiliated her so perversely and subtly. The mother-in-law's plan was diabolically simple: destroy the cabin property, and then either suggest the property had suffered due to vagrants or dishonest neighbors, or imply that Cassidy poorly maintained the property. In any case, the daughter-in-law's reputation would be damaged, and the husband would have a reason to complain. Cassidy continued checking the videos. By Saturday evening, the destruction was complete. Her mother-in-law walked around the entire property, assessing the results of her work. On her face was an expression of deep satisfaction. She even smiled, admiring the chaos she had caused. Sunday morning brought new discoveries. Beverly left the house early, around 7 a.m. She held a broom in her hand. Cassidy thought her mother-in-law planned to clean up the traces of her vandalism, but she was wrong. The woman carefully swept the paths, meticulously, as if preparing for the arrival of guests. Then she took garden gloves from her bag and began arranging the debris more artistically. The broken rose branches were positioned to make it look like a strong wind had snapped them. The overturned furniture was placed to give the impression it had been attacked by vandals. This was no longer just destruction, it was artistic direction. The mother-in-law was preparing a show where the main role was to be played by the unfortunate homemaker, incapable of protecting her property. Every detail was planned. Every element of the chaos had its place in the overall picture. Around 10 a.m., she began preparing to leave. Beverly moved the bags with the chickens toward the gate, hid them behind the fence, and then walked around the property again to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. Satisfied with the result, she entered the house. The next hour in the video, nothing happened. Apparently, the mother-in-law was resting before the trip home. Then she came out, locked up, and headed for the gate. The last frame showed her dragging the bags toward the bus stop. Cassidy leaned back in her chair, processing what she had seen. The scale of the betrayal was shocking. 30 years of knowing her mother-in-law, and she had never suspected such refined cruelty. Beverly had always seemed like an ordinary older woman, not particularly smart, not particularly mean. It turned out to be a mask hiding a cold, calculating enemy. But what was most surprising was the patience with which she prepared her revenge. How long had she been nurturing this plan? Years? Months? And how long had she concealed her hatred for her daughter-in-law behind the mask of indifferent courtesy? The phone rang again. Her mother, Amara, was asking how she was and if she needed anything brought to the cabin. Cassidy replied mechanically, but her mind was elsewhere. Should she tell her mother what happened? No, it was too soon. She first needed to decide what to do next. After the call, she reviewed the videos again. She wanted to make sure she hadn't missed anything, to fully understand her mother-in-law's motives. Every frame confirmed her initial conclusions. It was planned sabotage. Particularly revealing was the moment Beverly was talking on the phone. It was that Sunday call during which she talked about what a good time she was having. In the video, she was seen standing in the middle of the destroyed yard, smiling as she lied about healthy chickens and beautiful flowers. Her mother-in-law's acting skills were impressive. There was no trace of falsehood in her voice, only sincere joy and gratitude for being out in nature. And meanwhile, at her feet lay the remnants of a decorative windmill and asters torn out by the roots. Cassidy realized she couldn't delay. Every minute of delay played into her mother-in-law's hands, who was surely already planning how to present the story of the cabin's destruction, how to portray herself as the shocked witness to random vandalism. The anger demanded immediate action. In moments like this, people make impulsive acts they regret for the rest of their lives. But Cassidy had the character of a fighter. She wasn't used to backing down from difficulties and wasn't about to start now. Her first impulse was to go immediately to her mother-in-law's house and confront her face to face, show her the videos, force her to admit guilt, demand explanations. But sense told her that wasn't the best option. Beverly would find a way to wriggle out of it, accusing Cassidy of lying, manipulating facts, and trying to defame a respectable elderly woman. The second option was to tell her husband everything, show him the videos, explain the situation, and ask him to take action. But that path was also uncertain. Bryce adored his mother and always took her side in conflicts. Would he believe that his saintly mom was capable of such wickedness? The cell phone lay on the table, and Cassidy stared at it for a long time, contemplating the next step. Finally, the decision came to her on its own. The truth had to be told, regardless of the consequences. She dialed her husband's number. Bryce worked as a shift supervisor at the distribution center and always carried his phone. He answered on the third ring. "Cassidy, what's wrong? You usually don't call me from work." His voice sounded surprised, but not alarmed. Her husband still didn't suspect that his world was about to collapse. Cassidy inhaled deeply, preparing to utter the words that would change everything. "Your mother is a monster." She hung up without waiting for a reply, leaving Bryce to process that information, to try and understand what had happened. Then they would talk seriously, with evidence and facts. The phone rang again. Her husband was trying to call back, demanding explanations, but Cassidy didn't answer. She needed time to calm down and plan the next steps. The emotional impulse had been carried out. Now, cold calculation was required. She saved the most revealing fragments of the video to her phone's memory and created backup copies in the cloud. The evidence had to be irrefutable. Then she brewed a strong cup of tea and sat down to reflect on the situation. Beverly had overestimated herself. She had accounted for everything except one thing: the possibility of video surveillance. In her plans, there was no room for a witness recording her every act. That was her biggest and most fatal mistake. Now Cassidy held all the cards. The question was how to play them. She could simply show the videos to her husband and demand punishment for his mother. She could go to the police. The theft of chickens and intentional destruction of property constituted criminal offenses. Or she could organize a public exposé, showing all the neighbors and acquaintances the true face of the pious Beverly. Each option had pros and cons. A family conflict might end in reconciliation, but would hardly change the mother-in-law's attitude toward the daughter-in-law. A police investigation would be effective, but could ruin her relationship with her husband. A public exposé would satisfy her sense of justice, but would turn the family drama into a spectacle for everyone. Cassidy weighed all the pros and cons. The decision was not easy, but she ultimately chose the most radical option. Her mother-in-law did not deserve leniency. Anyone capable of such calculated cruelty deserved to receive their just punishment. She just had to wait for her husband's return, explain the situation, show him the videos, and tell him her plans, asking for his support. Bryce was a fair man. Upon seeing irrefutable proof, he wouldn't be able to side with his mother. At least, That's what Cassidy hoped with all her heart. The alternative was too terrifying to consider. If her husband didn't believe her, if he sided with his mother despite all the evidence, it would mean the end of their marriage, and Cassidy was less than ready for that turn of events. Time passed agonizingly slowly. Cassidy tried to occupy herself with household chores, but her thoughts constantly returned to what she had seen in the videos. The image of her mother-in-law, methodically destroying the fruits of her labor, remained before her eyes. Anger and disgust wrestled inside her with a feeling of deep disappointment. 30 years of life with Bryce. 30 years of a relationship with his mother, and only now had Cassidy seen the woman's true face. How many hidden grudges and disguised hatreds were concealed behind the mask of respectability? And what else would Beverly have been capable of doing in her quest to harm her daughter-in-law? These questions tormented her until evening. That night was meant to hold the decisive conversation with her husband, a dialogue that would determine the future destiny of their family and put all the cards on the table regarding her mother-in-law. Cassidy prepared for that conversation as if for the most important exam of her life. Too much depended on how she presented the information and how convincing her arguments were to allow for a mistake. The phone rang 10 minutes after her call. Bryce's number appeared on the screen. Her husband had tried to reach her for the 5th consecutive time. Cassidy stared at the vibrating device for a long time, gathering courage. This conversation would decide everything. "Cassidy, what the hell? What kind of language is that? What happened with Mom?" Her husband's voice trembled with emotion and incomprehension. In 30 years of life together, he had never heard anything like this from his wife. Cassidy was a composed person. She never allowed herself sharp comments, especially toward his mother. "Come home. I'll show you the proof. You'll see for yourself what your mother did at the cabin." "Proof of what? What are you talking about? My mother has health problems." "Her health is fine, but she has serious problems in her head." "Come, Bryce. I'll explain everything." The tone of her voice was icy, distant. Her husband sensed it and became completely disconcerted. He didn't know this Cassidy. Usually warm and kind, she now spoke as if she were a different person. "I can't leave work right now. I'm on shift until 6 p.m. I'll come home then, and we'll figure it out." "If you can't, don't bother. I'll take care of your mother myself." She cut the call and immediately turned off the phone. There would be no more conversations until a final decision on the course of action was made. Cassidy reviewed the most revealing fragments of the recording once more. Every frame reinforced her determination to see the matter through to the end. Beverly had gone too far for her actions to be forgiven or covered up with family conversations. Half an hour later, she was at the district police station. The building looked gloomy and official, but Cassidy had no doubts. Justice was more important than family tranquility. The desk sergeant listened to her report with surprise. The theft of chickens and damage to property by an elderly woman was not common in his experience. He directed her to Detective Marcus Price, who handled property crimes. Detective Price turned out to be a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a skeptical expression. He listened to Cassidy's story with clear distrust. "Ma'am, I understand. These are serious accusations toward elderly people. Are you sure you are interpreting what happened correctly? Perhaps your mother-in-law just wanted to help, and something went wrong." Cassidy silently took out her phone and played the recording. The first frames didn't particularly impress the detective. The old woman walked around the yard, looking around. But when the scene of verbal confrontation began, his expression changed. "Stop, rewind, show me again." Harry examined every frame carefully. The methodical destruction of the garden, the trashing of the flower beds, the overturning of the furniture. All of this was clearly not an accident or a helpful gesture. "Do you have documents proving ownership of the property?" "Of course. The cabin is in my husband's name, but I work there constantly. I do the maintenance. And the chickens, did you buy them? Do you have receipts or documents?" "Some I bought, others I raised myself. But that doesn't matter. The important thing is that they were stolen and the property was destroyed." The detective reviewed the recordings again, taking notes in his notebook. Then he looked up at Cassidy. "We will open a case. There are clear signs of theft and intentional destruction of property. We will draw up a report. We will take the recordings as physical evidence. Tomorrow we will go to the scene for inspection." Cassidy felt a wave of satisfaction. The first phase had been successful. Now the matter was not only in her hands, but also in the hands of the law. She returned home at 6 p.m. Bryce was already waiting for her, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. Seeing his wife, he lunged with questions. "Where were you? Why did you turn off your phone? What's going on with Mom?" "I was at the police station. I filed a report against your mother. The investigation will begin tomorrow." Her husband froze. He expected anything but this. Police, report, investigation, words that didn't fit the image he had of his mother. "Have you gone crazy? What police? What are you talking about?" Cassidy silently turned on her phone and showed him the recording. Bryce watched the screen with growing horror, first disbelief, then shock, and finally something akin to despair. "This can't be true. Mom isn't capable of something like this." "She is, as you can see. And not only is she capable, but she did it." "But why? What does she gain from this?" "Ask her yourself. She wanted to show me as a bad homemaker, to destroy our marriage. A simple, wicked plan." Bryce collapsed into a chair, holding his head in his hands. His world was crumbling. The image of the loving mother he had held in his heart all his life was shattering. Maybe she has mental problems, senile dementia, some illness. Look closely at the recording. Everything is done consciously and methodically. There are no signs of madness. They sat in silence for an hour, each processing what had happened in their own way. Then there was a knock at the door. On the threshold was Beverly in person. "What is all this commotion? The neighbor called. She says Cassidy is saying horrible things about me." Beverly looked, as always, like a quiet, discreet elderly woman, wearing a worn coat and a scarf. It was hard to believe that this woman was capable of what the recordings showed. "Mom, sit down. We need to talk." Bryce turned on the video on his phone and handed it to his mother. Beverly looked at the screen and instantly turned pale, but the next second she composed herself and returned the phone to her son. "What nonsense is this? This is a setup. Cassidy edited this video on purpose to defame me. My mother installed the camera, not me, and the recordings are authentic. Any expert examination can confirm that." "Your mother? Of course, you two conspired against me. You organized everything beforehand." Beverly launched into the attack. Her quiet voice became piercing, and her hands trembled with indignation. The mask of respectability fell completely. "I put up with that person for 30 years. 30 years watching her boss around my son, watching her turn him into a wimp. And now she still wants to send me to jail." "Mom, stop!" Bryce was shaken. He had never seen his mother in this state. "I won't stop. Everything is out in the open. Yes, I ruined her stupid cabin property. And what did she say to me? 'Look at yourself, son. You've become a pushover next to her, a man under a woman's thumb.'" The family scandal intensified minute by minute. Beverly unleashed years of accumulated resentment and bitterness. Cassidy listened to the avalanche of insults with a stony face. "Now you understand who your mother really is," Cassidy said. "This is her true face." "Shut up, trash!" shrieked the mother-in-law. "You are to blame for everything. If it weren't for you, my son would be happy." "Mom," Bryce shouted, "apologize to your wife immediately." "Never! I'd rather go to jail than apologize to that repulsive woman." The scandal continued late into the night. Finally, Beverly stormed out, slamming the door. Bryce sat crushed in the kitchen by what he had seen and heard. "Why didn't you warn me about the camera? Why did you go straight to the police?" "And what would have changed? Would you have sided with her, as always? You would have tried to cover everything up, find an excuse. Maybe. But now our family is destroyed." "I didn't destroy it. Your mother destroyed it with her actions. I just opened your eyes to the truth." The conversation reached a dead end. Each remained firm in their opinion. Bryce couldn't forgive his wife for her cruelty toward his mother. Cassidy had no intention of repenting for her actions. The next morning, a new phase of the confrontation began. Detective Price arrived at the cabin with a group of experts. The inspection confirmed everything seen in the recordings: ruined garden plots, broken flower beds, overturned furniture, clear evidence of vandalism. But the most interesting part began when the detective started questioning the neighbors in the community. Cassidy hadn't even suspected the revelations that awaited her. Mindy, from the adjacent plot, recounted that she had seen Beverly dragging large sacks away from the fence on Saturday morning. It seemed strange, but she didn't intervene. Jasper, who lived across the way, reported more serious things. "I've suspected her for about 3 years now. My cucumbers disappear, then my tomatoes. Once I saw my rain barrel on her plot. I thought she took it by mistake, but now I understand. She was stealing." Simone added, "Last year I lost a chicken, my best layer. It was there in the morning and gone by night. I thought a fox got it. Now I have my doubts." Little by little, a picture of years of minor thefts and systematic sabotage began to form. Beverly was not an occasional thief. She operated constantly in the community. "We were all scared of her," Tanisha admitted. "On the outside, she seemed quiet, but her eyes were fierce. If something wasn't right, she could do anything bad. The Parkers' dog died poisoned after a conflict with her." The detective carefully recorded all the testimonies. By the end of the day, he had a considerable folder of material. Beverly had gone from being an ordinary grandmother to a public order offender. She was summoned to give a statement a week later. Cassidy deliberately went to the precinct to observe her mother-in-law's reaction. Beverly was defiant, denying all accusations and citing her age and illnesses. "I am a sick old woman. I'm 70 years old. What theft? What vandalism? It's all the fault of my wicked daughter-in-law." But when the videos were shown to her, her behavior changed radically. First, she tried to claim the recordings were edited. Then, when the experts confirmed their authenticity, she switched to justification. "Yes, I ruined it. And what did that trash deserve? 30 years of enduring her taunts about my son." "What taunts, specifically?" the detective asked. "She bosses him around like a servant, makes him work all weekend at that cabin, and he still thanks her for it." The motive for the crime became obvious: jealousy toward the daughter-in-law, a desire to destroy her marriage with her son, simple revenge for years of supposed dominance. The case went to court 2 months later. By then, Cassidy had already gotten used to the new reality. Bryce had completely withdrawn into himself, barely speaking to his wife and spending all his free time in the garage. All participants in the drama gathered in the courtroom. Beverly sat in the defendant's box in a black dress, feigning to be a victim. Her lawyer tried to present the case as a family conflict that did not merit criminal sanction. "My client is an elderly woman who acted in a state of distress. She was not pursuing selfish goals, but only trying to protect her son from the negative influence of her daughter-in-law." But the prosecutor was determined. "This is not a family conflict, but a carefully planned crime. The defendant systematically committed thefts against community neighbors for many years, and this crime is the culmination of her criminal activity," Cassidy testified. She narrated the events calmly, without emotion, relying only on the facts. The judge listened attentively and asked clarifying questions. "Tell me, victim, what material damage was caused to you?" 32 chickens with a total value of $100. The destroyed vegetables and flowers totaled another $200 in addition to the moral damage. "And did you not try to resolve the conflict within the family sphere? What's the point of resolving a conflict with someone who concealed her true nature for 30 years? I demand fair punishment." The climax of the process was Beverly's own testimony. She rose to the stand and delivered a speech that shocked everyone present. "Yes, I did it, and I don't regret it. That woman especially ruined my son's life, turning a real man into a wimp. I just wanted to teach the ingrate a lesson." "So you admit your guilt?" the judge asked. "What guilt? I was protecting my son. Any mother would have done the same." The courtroom gasped. No one expected such cynicism. Even the defense attorney shook his head. Defending that position was impossible. The sentence was harsher than Cassidy expected. Beverly received 2 years of probation with mandatory community service and the obligation to repair the damages. The judge particularly highlighted the defendant's cynicism and lack of remorse. The court takes into account the age of the defendant but cannot ignore the severity of the act committed or her attitude. The crime was committed for base motives, with particular cruelty. After the trial, Cassidy felt emptiness instead of the expected victory. Justice had been served, but at what price? The family was destroyed. Her husband had distanced himself, and her mother-in-law had become the #1 enemy. Bryce waited for her outside the courthouse. He looked 10 years older. His eyes reflected deep pain. "Happy? Your mother is now a convict. The family is in ruins." "And what was I supposed to do? Shut up and endure?" "You could have warned me about the camera. You could have not gone immediately to the police. You could have tried to resolve everything as a family. And what would have changed? Your mother would have remained the same, and I would be humiliated and offended. You destroyed my family. Your mother destroyed it. I just opened your eyes to the truth." The conversation reached an impasse. Each stood firm in their opinion. Bryce couldn't forgive his wife for her cruelty toward his mother. Cassidy had no intention of regretting her actions. The divorce was finalized 3 months after the trial. The process was quiet, without scandals or mutual recriminations. Simply 2 people who could no longer live together. The apartment had to be sold, and the communal property was divided. Cassidy bought a small 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Bryce rented a place closer to his work. Cassidy restored the cabin property over the summer, bought new chickens, planted the garden, and set up flowers. But she felt no joy in her work. Every plant reminded her of what had been destroyed by her mother-in-law. Beverly served her sentence doing community service, sweeping streets and cleaning parks. Neighbors avoided her, children pointed their fingers. Her reputation was completely ruined. A year after the trial, Cassidy received a letter from her ex-husband. Bryce announced he was marrying a co-worker, a woman 10 years younger, and asked not to be bothered or to attempt to resume the relationship. She read the letter and tore it up. No feeling except a slight sadness. The past was in the past. The future was uncertain but free. A year and a half later, news came that Beverly had been hospitalized after a stroke. Cassidy did not visit her mother-in-law, did not send flowers, and didn't even ask about her condition. What was the point of showing concern for someone who had planned her humiliation for so many years? The mother-in-law recovered, but remained partially paralyzed. Bryce hired a caregiver and visited only occasionally. His new wife categorically refused to deal with his mother. Cassidy learned this from the neighbors who had passed by the cabin. They recounted the facts with delight. Justice had finally been served. The wicked mother-in-law got what she deserved, and the daughter-in-law defended her rights. But Cassidy didn't fully feel the victory. Loneliness weighed on her increasingly. Friends and acquaintances were divided into 2 camps. Some supported her. Others considered she had been excessive in punishing an elderly woman. The work at the cabin no longer brought her joy. Every garden plot, every flower reminded her of that day she first saw the camera recording, the moment her former life collapsed. In the evenings, sitting in her empty apartment, Cassidy reflected on the price of justice. She had gotten what she wanted. Her mother-in-law was punished. The truth triumphed, but it didn't bring happiness. Bryce was right. The family was destroyed. But it wasn't destroyed by the camera or the police report. It was destroyed the moment Beverly decided to declare war on her daughter-in-law. Cassidy merely brought that war to its logical conclusion. She won, but the victory was bitter. Justice triumphed. But at what price? At the price of 30 years of shared life, the price of family, the price of the future. Sometimes she wondered, what would have happened if my mother hadn't installed the camera? My mother-in-law would have destroyed the cabin, blamed the daughter-in-law or the neighbors. Scandals, resentments, the gradual destruction of my relationship with my husband. Perhaps the result would have been the same, but it would have taken years. The camera only accelerated the inevitable. It showed the true nature of the people I lived with for 30 years, a husband who loved his mother more than his wife, and a mother-in-law who accumulated resentment for 3 decades and waited for the moment to take revenge. The truth freed her from illusions, but it didn't bring her happiness. Cassidy was left alone, but with a clean conscience. She didn't betray herself. She didn't resign herself to humiliation. She didn't allow her life to be trampled. Justice triumphed, but the price was so high that sometimes she wondered, was it worth it? The answer didn't come immediately, but it was always the same. Yes, it was worth it, because life in a lie couldn't continue indefinitely, because everyone must answer for their actions, because justice is worth more than family tranquility based on deception. She paid for the truth with everything she had. There was no other option, and she regretted nothing. On the last day of summer, Cassidy sat at her restored cabin, surrounded by new flowers and young vegetables. The chickens pecked grain in peace. The sun set on the horizon. Beauty and calm surrounded her, but in her soul there was emptiness. Justice had triumphed. The price had been fully paid. Life went on, but it was different. Without a husband, without a family, without illusions, but honest and authentic. Cassidy knew she had acted correctly, no matter how costly that justice had been.